Hello and welcome to Profiles. I'm your host, Ed Hyland. Today we welcome a guest with many perspectives to share about the subject of housing. Dr. Mike Mullens is an associate professor in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Management Systems at UCF, but he also serves on the board of two ministries. The UCF Wesley Foundation is the Methodist Youth Ministry on the Orlando campus, and Word Made Flesh is an international ministry that serves the poorest of the poor. Welcome, Mike. Thank you so much for coming by and joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ed, for giving me the opportunity to
Let's start, if we could, a little bit about Word Made Flesh. I mean, that one was kind of a new one to me. Tell me a little bit about the organization.
It's an organization that started in the early 90s, and our leader and director, Chris Hewerts, had just graduated from Asbury College, which is a Methodist college in Kentucky, and he had decided he wanted to put his faith into action. So at that time, Mother Teresa was the ultimate putting faith into action person. So he traveled to Calcutta and worked in her home for the dying, Caligot. And he said during that time, in a short period of time, he carried out 30, 40 bodies. And he came to a new relationship. And during that time, he committed himself to starting an organization, kind of the evangelical counterpart of Mother Teresa's organization, the Missionaries of Charity. So Word Made Flesh was born at that time, and now about 12 years later we have roughly 100 missionaries in roughly 8 of the largest megacities in the world, serving people in their worst slums, and these are typically street kids and street women.
Talk about the relationship, if you will, now, Word Made Flesh and the ministry there, which you're a part of, and the subject of housing and engineering. How do the two,
how do they blend
together?
It all started with a student, and just a brief background. My student invited me to speak at a Wesley campus ministry. She had heard that I was a Christian, and so I was very reluctant to do that because I try to separate the two aspects of my life, for better or worse. But anyway, I volunteered to come and speak to the organization, and as it would happen, I became deeply involved in that organization, the UCF Wesley Foundation, which is a Methodist campus ministry. And so I was invited to go on their first large-scale mission trip and help lead the mission trip. And the reason that is because the director of the Wesley ministry, his wife became pregnant and she was supposed to deliver at almost exactly the time the mission trip. So I was drafted, and I had never been on a mission trip before, and I visited the Word Made Flesh. The whole UCF group visited the Word Made Flesh mission in Lima, Peru. And after watching street kids and living around street kids for several weeks and watching how that affected the lives not only of our students but of me, it changed me a little bit. And during that time I met Chris Hewerts, the director of Word Made Flesh, and we developed a relationship, and he asked me to come onto their board, and that was a miraculous thing for me because I clearly didn't belong at the same level as they were. I volunteered, and I've done that now for the last 5 years. Last year when the tsunami hit Sri Lanka and much of the Far East, one of Chris's best friends had become director of Habitat for Humanity in Sri Lanka, and he invited Word Made Flesh to do the Habitat building on the south end of Sri Lanka. And for those of us who don't remember exactly what happened, Sri Lanka wasn't as hard hit as some others, but in Sri Lanka there was a 30-foot wall of water that washed in roughly 2 kilometers, and it leveled everything in its path. And so there are now, it killed thousands, but in this area there are literally thousands of families living in tents. And anyway, Word Made Flesh decided to move some of their missionaries who are now in Calcutta and Kathmandu in that part of the world and come down to Sri Lanka and basically serve as an organizing organization to bring volunteers from the United States over and work. And there are hundreds that have come through. So it was the first time we've ever done home building, but because my background was home building, I helped to organize some of that effort, and they invited me to come over. I just returned about 2 weeks ago from a trip over there. So that's a long way to say that we're now building homes for Habitat for Humanity in Galle in the southern region of Sri Lanka.
Well, let's, as we continue to talk, show just a couple of the pictures. We've got about a dozen pictures, and they're in no particular order, but they are reflective, I think, of not only the people, but also some of the projects you were working on over there.
Well, the first thing I did, I developed a real appreciation for what we have in the United States compared to the rest of the world. On the drive-in from Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, down to Galle on the southern tip of Sri Lanka, you go through miles and miles of roadway, and everywhere you look there are temporary wood housing. You see it in the back, but there are basically everything is leveled. And these used to be houses that you see right here.
That's just
that's a flat slab, and that's all
yeah.
that's left after the wall of water rushed through. This is a group, this is the latest group of volunteers that were there when I was there. These are young ladies from Omaha, from California, and from Arkansas. And one of the most beautiful things about these ministries is you probably spend more time with the people that you're working for there in the area than you do actually building houses. And as you can see, we're having a great time there. The one thing, you know, American home building techniques just don't translate very well here, because this is river sand. It was just delivered by a little motorized cart, and river sand, you have to sand everything, you have to sift everything before you can actually use it in the concrete. And so here we're literally sifting everything by hand, and sometimes you have to sift everything twice before you use it. This again is coming in, and there are literally thousands of tents up and down the coast of people that are living there temporarily waiting for homes to be rebuilt, and you literally can't build them fast enough.
I was going to say, you've got these, well, first of all, where do the tents come from? Is the government providing the tents?
The tents, it's beautiful. As you go down there, you see tents, and every tent has a marker from the country it's from. And so you'll see USAID, you'll see Sweden, Finland, Japan, Korea. But it's a beautiful representation of what the world can do in terms of focusing on an area that needs help and providing supplies to do that.
Is the home rebuilding effort also an international effort as well?
It is, but it's a lot slower building homes than it is building tents. The tents you just erect in a matter of minutes. Homes, because the materials you use have to be almost made by hand and processed by hand and delivered by hand, takes far longer than you would ever believe. For such a rudimentary 250 square foot house is fairly typical for that market.
Okay, that was the next thing I was going to ask. How big a house? At 250 square feet, I mean, there's some people that have their living rooms bigger than that.
It's tiny.
That is a small area, and that would be for an entire family?
That would be for often 3 generations.
Wow. And how do you take it, and I guess you're coming into an area that is not only different culturally, but there's got to be language barriers. There are probably religious barriers as well, as far as differences are concerned, and you've got to convince these folks that you are here to help them. Is some of that laid out for you? Are there open arms automatically there, or is it a question of you got to win the folks over before you start the building process? That was
the biggest shock. Culturally, it certainly is different. Religiously, these are all Muslim communities. And we were expecting maybe tension because we are obviously Christian, and I've never seen such warm hospitality. It's the warmest hospitality I've seen, and I visited a number of our missions around the world. And part of it is we're actually helping them build houses. Every day after work, they would invite us into their houses for tea. And remember, you talked about the language. Sri Lanka used to be Ceylon. It's one of the world's biggest tea producers. It's an island just off the coast of India. So it's very much an Indian kind of influence. But the Muslim community there is very open and loving, and I think when you're giving of yourself, you in turn get. And I think that's one of the oldest precepts of our religion and of most religions, and that certainly is what we found right there. The community there was so open and warm and giving that it makes it tough to leave.
Let me switch a little bit and talk on, I guess it wouldn't be exactly technical, but is there a reverse learning process as well? I mean, you're going in and utilizing the native materials, and we saw the sand having to be sifted and this type of thing. Is there anything that you pick up as someone who's involved in construction and housing and how things should be built? Are there techniques, ideas, concepts that perhaps are native and you say, you know, maybe I can use that in my papers, my research in terms of developing houses that are more able to withstand the elements?
I truthfully haven't filtered what I learned at that level yet. I was learning so much at I'll say a higher level that I'm not sure I've reached the level of taking the technical understanding and translating it back. What it did do is make me greatly appreciate the kind of systems, the supply chain that we have, how easy it is to get things to a construction site and to use them when they're there, and the tools that we have. What it did do is say that we don't have to have all that stuff to build homes. We can build homes without it, and we can build very livable homes that you build a home there for $300. So it gives you an idea of what we're capable of if we truly want to do it. And these aren't bad homes when they're completed. And right now we have homeless living in the United States, so I think that could be one of the translations. In terms of technical, I'm not sure I've taken away a lot technically that could be used in these markets that we have in the local markets right here, simply because these markets demand efficiency, and that is not one of the qualities of their building systems.
But you hit on a key point, affordable housing. And of course, we have many more pictures to show of the mission work that you've done, which I really want to get to, but it does, beg the question. It seems like it's very difficult for anyone now to be able to buy an affordable house. Everywhere, it's just there's this huge, well, they're calling it a bubble, but there's just an increase in the cost of real estate. But yet, technologically, we can do that. We can make a less expensive home. Why aren't we?
I think because there's money to be made, and it's the speculation that's in the market right now. One of the top 3 reasons we have homes is, of course, investment. And as long as investment is one of our prime motives, and we expect to make a profit on that home, and certainly the people that build homes expect to make profits on it. Many of them now are public corporations, and
you got the shareholders
first and best use is what we're going after. What it did show me is that we're capable of building homes should we have the will to do it for a very good price that people can actually afford and live in. And they're very livable homes. And
Habitat has been proving that with the community efforts that they've been doing in Central Florida and across
does
the
a
country.
Wonderful job right here in Central Florida.
And they've incorporated the UCF football team, I know, and the basketball team, and some other folks. Anybody who can hold a hammer pretty much is able to help and contribute. And
our research group right here at Central Florida, my housing research group, we've built houses, a number of houses in the United States working with Habitat. And the research group I work with at the Florida Solar Energy right here in Brevard, they work very closely with Habitat, trying to build much higher quality housing with much lower energy costs than there currently are, with much greater comfort.
And if you do it on the beginning phases of it, you can make it more affordable instead of
the
trying
design
to retrofit.
stage is clearly where you want to do it. By the way, there's a concept here. I heard the term the first time. I was at MIT earlier this week, and we were talking about how we integrate, how we link the research we do with philanthropic or important efforts, other important efforts. And the term was, we do good by doing good. And that is, we can take some of our research and devote part of it to areas that don't normally get a lot of attention, that may not have tremendous investment going into it. In this particular case, MIT is working very closely with a severely disabled community, where they're building houses in that community, next generation houses in that community that feature many different features that the community wouldn't have been able to do the research to do, but with MIT's insight, and we've been contributing some on it as well. But I think that's the whole idea of we call it service learning in the academic side, when we try to do projects and we get involved in projects that not only work with local industry but also contribute to the other side of our communities, the softer side of our communities.
That's something that inspired, that line is kind of what inspired the question earlier. I was just wondering if maybe there were ways that we could do what we do here in the States in a less expensive fashion to make things more affordable. And I didn't know whether they perhaps had mastered some of that in other countries because they have limited resources to do.
Well, certainly they're the masters of improvisation. And I think, but that's the trouble with our research. Our research tends to look at the very, very technical, the very, very high end. Very rarely does it come back and look at what we could do at the lower end of the market to really bring people up to some basic level of services and products. And that's just the nature of our research.
Let's look at a couple more pictures if we could, just to continue the wonderful mission that was done in the Sri Lanka area. And you've got still the remnants of the damage there on the beach areas. You said a 30-foot wall of water.
30-foot wall of water. Almost every house there has small fishing boats put on the side of it, but as you go up and down the beach, you see what was left after the tsunami, and literally it took their very livelihood and it shattered it.
Largely a fishing community?
It's fishing community. And again, looking out, this is looking out from one of the construction sites. You see many of the tent cities that you see up and down the highway in the background. Literally thousands of families living in tents.
Now, could you rehab some of the houses that were damaged, lost roofs, and I see shells here, I guess is what?
Probably not. Most of those are damaged to such an extent. What you have to do is go right down to their foundation and rebuild it. This is the delivery mechanism in the background. That's why it's so hard to get things. That's their equivalent of a pickup. And that's how they deliver sand and concrete block. And,
it's just a motor with two wheels, pretty much.
It's a motor and two wheels with a cart pulled behind it. It's one of our young volunteers getting ready to sift some more sand.
Now, is that a house, an example of the house that you have put together behind them?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
A number of houses in that community. The sea there is powerful. It's like the west coast of the United States. It's one of the most beautiful areas I've ever seen in the world. And yet the sea constantly breaks over the seawall just under normal conditions. What it gave you a sense of is what it must look like when a wall of water 30 foot high rises up and completely overwhelms a village. And it really turns something that was their primary livelihood into something destructive. And that's almost like a breaking of a bond between a community when they have that, that reliance on something, and that something comes back and bites them. I think that will take some time to repair.
Do you think that is it a constant battle there? I mean, for them. I mean, you're saying that the sea is an ever-present friend and enemy at the same time, and you have houses that you've worked on and started them down the path. And I assume that they're also learning as you were there, learning from you. Okay, here's how we can do this for the rebuilding process. But it's almost an ongoing process. They are always having to renew, refurbish, and rebuild after what the sea has done to them.
Yeah, actually, they don't seem to have been hit many times by a disaster, certainly not of this scale. So this is the first time I've heard of that happening, where they've had to do serious rebuilding. In terms of what they learned from us, one of the reasons I was there is to try to share some of the management techniques we use to get materials to site before you actually begin construction. In the beginning of our workday there, we'd spend the first 2 hours just trying to find materials, enough materials to build another layer of block on a wall, and to sift the materials if we had sand, and then to go out and find the tools, because the tools, someone else would pick up our tools and wander to another house and be building. So we'd lose half a day just getting the basics we needed in order to do construction, and to try to communicate that to them so that they could better understand how to have a more logical, productive flow. But I'm not sure we were entirely successful. That'll be a continued challenge for our effort there.
Are there home builders, housing contractors, that type of thing over there, or is it more?
It's almost all volunteer right now. I'm sure the higher end, sure, they get what they pay for, but here you have people with almost no savings, and it's really a hand-to-mouth situation.
So if you're a fisherman, basically you call your friends up and say, I need to fix the roof on my house or whatever, kind of like the old United States
exact barn raising,
out in the barn raising, and that type of thing.
That's very true.
It's interesting, the parallels there. Let's jump a little bit. We've got a couple more pictures I do want to show, but I want to talk a little bit. We're talking about storms and destruction, and one of your projects that's ongoing right now and has been a while is here in the States and in Florida in particular. Yes. Water intrusion became a big issue during the series of hurricanes that we had, and you've been involved very closely in trying to figure out exactly how that happened, and perhaps come up with some ways to make this not happen in the future, or at least to give some ideas out there. Kind of give us an update, if you will, about where that stands as we sit here almost a year later as to how the research is coming in the testing process.
Thank you for asking. That's an important one. Last summer and fall we were hit by 3 hurricanes almost right in a row. The last hurricane, although it was probably the least overall, the least strength overall, did the most damage to this area, damage caused by water. And this water, when it came through, it seemed to come, the scary thing about it is the roofs didn't disappear, the water just seemed to come right through the walls. and literally thousands of homes were damaged like this, creating just untold horror stories in terms of loss. So we decided we would take a closer look at that, and we had a national expert in the area come through and give some ideas as to what the issues were. And because we were here on site, we decided to pick up on some of those areas because he didn't have enough time to really quantify the results. And as scientists, we like to quantify what the results were and then make our recommendations. So we picked up on his recommendations, and we're doing testing now. And one of my colleagues and I, Dr. Bob Hoekstra at the University of Central Florida, we developed some test equipment that we're using here, and basically one of our builders that we're working with termed it a hurricane in a box. And what we do, we slap this box on the side of a wall and we pressurize it, and we actually force water through the wall. And we see how much water the wall can absorb.
And that replicates a certain speed, right?
As a matter of fact, we can adjust the speed, and the standard test conditions are 60 miles an hour, just over hurricane force winds, and about 4.5 inches of rain an hour. And that's probably a good start. We looked at the weather data that came in on Hurricane Jeanne, and that's a reasonable representation of what happened over the period. So we're testing homes right now and trying to understand, and we're testing homes at different stages of construction and using different construction techniques and trying to learn empirically what factors affect the flow of water through walls during hurricanes.
So what doesn't work and potentially what does work
Exactly.
as well.
Exactly, and we'll be actually building some test walls to test some new techniques as well.
Anything results in terms of what's come out yet, or is it still in the phase and has to be documented and rechecked before you get to the point?
As scientists, we feel it's necessary
to
better understand what the issues are before we start talking about results.
So we're not sure if that extra coat of paint's going to work for us or not.
There are so many solutions that might work, but a house is really an integrated system. You have to be careful. Let's assume we just take a solid surface on the outside of the house, a surface that doesn't allow any water through, and that keeps the water out during a hurricane, but it also traps water in. If water ever gets in, it can't get out, and so it creates other problems like potentially moisture and mildew in walls. So we have to be careful looking at the whole system rather than just one part of the system.
I think what surprised so many people is Florida's no stranger to hurricanes. We've had tropical storms, we've had high winds in this area, but then maybe because we had 3 in a row, or maybe just because this one was very unique, that last one that came on through, or one of the 3 that came on through was so unique, that suddenly we have the water intrusion. Was it happening before and we didn't realize it? Was it because of the uniqueness of this situation? I guess that's part of the surprise for a lot of people is, gee, we didn't know we had this problem.
Maybe 3 factors come into play here. The first is the fact that we had 2 previous hurricanes, and maybe some water got in the walls during those events. And the second thing is, Jeanne, when it decided to come through here, it came through very slowly with sustained winds and rain. So it put a constant sheet of water on the house under high pressure. And it did that for hours, like over 12 hours. So that was fairly unusual. Most of the times hurricanes come through very quickly, like our first storm last year. It does lots of damage, but then it's gone, and so there's not a real opportunity for rain to continue to infiltrate walls. And the third issue, of course, is workmanship. And I think that's what we're exploring too. Has our construction quality gone down over time? And are we using as high quality of materials as we were earlier in the process? It's interesting to see that almost all the water intrusion that was reported, thousands of cases, happened on homes built since 2000. That's pretty interesting statistic.
Could be telling, because from what I understand, all these homes did pass the current inspections and the
codes.
Other checks.
Yeah, they meet current codes.
So maybe a little research work and a little change there along the way. We'll find out as the research develops.
We hope.
Wanted to thank you for coming over and sharing all this information with you. We've got one more picture, and I did want to close on that. We've talked a little bit about hurricanes in Florida. We talked about water intrusion. Talked about housing here in Central Florida as well as the rest of the country that perhaps could be made more affordable, and certainly those who do not have homes are certainly deserving in this country. But I think it puts it all in perspective when we get a chance with our last picture just to look back on some people who don't have nearly as much as we do and yet lost everything, and yet now they have a new place thanks to organizations like Word for Flesh and also the Habitat for Humanity. Now this is a family home. last family before they moved in kind of thing?
Yeah, this is a shot. This is not a house that we worked on personally, but this is, before we turn over the home, we take one shot of the family standing in front of their home, and this is a family, and what you see as you walk up and down the streets now are just hundreds of these houses with people that wave you in because they now have a home, and that creates a bond that's important. Hundreds
of these houses. Were these houses that were not, and these were not there before? I mean,
yes.
did a lot of these people not have?
No, a lot of them did. They did. They're modest homes,
yeah.
but they're gone. So think of your home, and you have no capital to rebuild your home. You lived in a small home, modest home, and now it's gone, and now you're living in a tent, and that's the situation that most of these people were in.
That's something to keep in mind as we
yes.
we continue throughout our day as well.
Yes.
Dr. Mike Mullens, thank you so much for coming by and joining us today on our Profiles program. We'll look to have you back sometime. We'll talk a little more about hurricane and water intrusion perhaps as well as your research develops.
Thank you.
Thanks again, and thank you for joining us on Profiles. I'm Ed Hyland. See you next time.